Let's take a few moments to settle in. You might close your eyes or keep them slightly open and notice the passing stream of thoughts, emotions, and sensations. And as you do, ask yourself, how am I relating to this passing stream of thoughts, emotions, and sensations? So as you notice a thought bubble up or an emotion run its course, how do you relate to that emotion or thought? Taking a few more moments to acknowledge whatever is real and true for you right now, and notice how you are relating to whatever is real and true for you right now. Hmm. And when you're ready, you can open your eyes and welcome yourself to the space. Hmm. So, hello, welcome, namaste, everybody. Thanks to those of you joining me in the room. Thanks to those of you joining me on Zoom. And thanks to those of you joining and listening to the recording afterwards. My name is Zach Beach, and this is a little Dharma talk that I like to call Living from the Heart, all about this 18-inch spiritual journey, which can sometimes take many lifetimes simply traveling from the head to the heart space. I like to start with a poem of my own as a lead in to this week's teachings. And finally, we'll finish with a short meditation to integrate what we've talked about. And we'll end with a bit of time at the end for question and answer. And today's poem is called A Divine Meeting Indeed. You do not say hello to a lamppost or smile at a mailbox or nod at the moon, but behind every human meeting, there is recognition. Oh, your awareness too. You're just like me, a God, in a sensing, feeling, seeing field of a body, a veritable walking bundle of heart and wisdom. Of course, nothing would get done if we had to stop on our knees and worship every divine being we come across. So for now, a smile or a nod will do, and a simple word. Namaste. I wanted to begin by talking today about Martin Buber's I-thou relationship and how that might relate to mystical awakening. So for those that don't know, Martin Buber was a Russian philosopher who wrote many works, and one of his most famous ones is often translated as I and Thou. It's a German book, so it's actually entitled Ich und Du, and it was written in 1923. And Martin Buber is usually put in the same category as other existential philosophers like Sartre, Heidegger, and Merleau. But what makes Martin Buber particularly interesting is he is one of the few theistic philosophers. There's a lot of atheistic philosophers in the existential tradition, but Martin Buber has his own distinct approach and his own distinct flavor on these ideas because of his theistic and Jewish background. And we've talked already in this series of Dharma talks about what it means to shift our worldview. Yoga fundamentally is a darshan, a way of seeing, a world view. We all have lenses that we perceive reality through. And Swami Satchidananda says, spiritual practice is not what you are doing, but what you are thinking. And this can sometimes be a bit of a rude awakening for those yogis that are particularly focused on asana. Is it doesn't matter how intense your posture looks or how advanced your posture seems, because we are cultivating an internal state of mind. So you could do a very challenging posture, but if your mind is scattered, unfocused, and full of hatred, greed, and delusion, then we're not practicing yoga. If we are practicing a very easy posture and the mind is full of love, peace, and compassion, that is true yoga. So we are always taking this U-turn. We are always looking at our own internal states. We are always examining our own world view. And I wanted to really examine today is our relationship with the world. And I, thou, and Martin Buber's idea of I, thou really challenges our normal way of relating. I also love metta, or loving kindness. And I've heard that loving kindness or metta is where mindfulness meets the world with appreciation. And I always love that approach. We meet the world with appreciation. This is one way of shifting our relationship to reality. So Martin Buber offers two relationships for you to consider of how you relate to the world. We have I-it relationships and I-thou relationships. The I-it relationship is a fundamental subject-object duality. You are the I interacting in a world of its. So the I-it mode of relating treats others and other objects to be used for their own end, very separate and distinct from yourself. And when we do treat the world as objects, we tend to find that objects are only as useful as the function that they perform for us. So what does a refrigerator do? It refrigerates. What does a blender do? It blends. We often measure an object's ability to fulfill its purpose by how good it is at doing what it was designed to do. So a car is designed to get us from point A to point B. A glass is just as useful as how well it holds water. And this is not a necessarily bad way of relating to the world. It is just one way that once we begin to recognize how we do it and what it is, we can begin to shift our darshan, shift our way of relating to one that cultivates more connection. Because nobody, I don't think anybody here or anybody listening wants to be treated as an object, wants to be quite literally objectified and thought of only having value for what you can do for a specific person. And we experience this a lot. You might even have somebody break up with you and they just say, you know what? You are not meeting my needs. You are not fulfilling the obligations that you are supposed to do. So I'm going to toss you aside. There's a story of there's a story of two partners in a couple's talking to one another, and one of them turns to their partner and says, "You know what? You just hear what you want to hear." And the other one says, "I would like a beer. Thank you." So when we perceive others as objects, others as functions that they fulfill for us, it becomes a filter. You even meet somebody new, and you might even ask them, "What do you do?" And we often define people as their profession. When you get pulled over by a police officer, you don't say, "How are you today?" You say, "How are you, officer?" Suddenly, this human being gets reduced to their function that they play in society. And sometimes we even treat God as an object. We treat God as an object that is supposed to be fulfilling certain needs of ours. So we pray and we pray for things to happen in our life. We say, "Please, God, can I have a raise? Can I have a promotion? Can you make such and such happen in my life?" And we expect God to do the same things that objects do for us. We think that we can take a part of ourselves and manipulate an object to fulfill its function, just like we pick up a phone and manipulate it and we set it down to fulfill a function. We begin to treat others and even God the same way. So there is a certain fundamental distance in the I it relationship, a fundamental separation between subject and object. And it reduces our very humanness. And not only do we sometimes treat the world and God as an object, we even sometimes treat our own bodies as an object. You might even go to the doctor and say, "My arm hurts." And they say, "How does it feel?" And you say, "It feels painful." Suddenly, we've objectified our own self. So Eduardo Galeano, the poet, says, "The church says the body is a sin. Advertisements say the body is a business. Science says the body is a machine. The body says I am a fiesta." So these are different world views. How do you even relate to your own body? And the interesting thing about Martin Buber's work is that he wrote Ich und Du, he wrote I and Thou in the 1920s. And his concerns might sound a little bit familiar to us in the 2020s. He was worried about the advancement of technology, bringing all these new devices into the world. And suddenly we are treating more and more of the world as an it. He saw a rise of certain technologies like the car and other machines, and he began to have a certain level of fear. What happens when we are only in the I it mode of relationships? So we see this now, right? We are in love with our its. We love our phones. Just try to take a phone away from your teenager, and you will see just how much attachment there is in the I it relationship. We love our phones, we love our cars, we love our houses. We are dominated by a world of it. And at the same time, not only was Buber concerned about the rising technological age, reducing our humanity to subject object to I it relationships, he was also concerned about the rise of nationalism and capitalism that finds it very hard to have I you relationships. He saw how a rise of exploitation, domination, and oppression explicitly created I it relations. So I think many workers, you might say, feel this. They feel like they are a cog in a much larger machine. Like they feel that they are in a relationship with a corporation that teaches them as an object whose sole purpose is to fulfill a certain function. And we also see this in nationalism. We see how separation creates distance. And when there is distance, it's easy to objectify another human being and dehumanize them in the process. So Martin Buber was a Jewish philosopher. He saw in the 1920s the dangers of the rise of nationalism. And it wasn't too soon after that where during the Holocaust, the Jews were referred to as rats, very dehumanizing. And that's often what authoritarian regimes do when they want to remove certain populations, certain peoples that don't agree with their authority. They dehumanize them. They turn them into objects. During the 1994 Rwandan genocide, the Tutsis were referred to as cockroaches, and people said that they needed to exterminate them. So we can see how this I-it mode of relating, this I-it mode of the stance that we can take with the world is a source of exploitation, domination, oppression, and separation. Now, there are ways it gets perverted, but Buber didn't, again, necessarily say the I-it relationship is fundamentally wrong. He says, as we go throughout our days, we enter into I-it relationships all the time. When you go to the grocery store and you pass by the cashier, you need them to scan your items. You need them to fulfill a certain obligation for your life. And this is natural. That being said, when we don't see the person behind the occupation, behind the function, behind the it changes our relationship with them. So there's a story. A young army officer who had a history of anger-related problems was ordered to attend a mindfulness training class to reduce his level of stress. One day, after attending the class for some weeks, he stopped for groceries on his way home. He was in a hurry and a bit irritated, and as usual, the checkout lines were long. There was a woman in front of him who only had one item, but wasn't in the express line. She was carrying a baby and talking to the cashier. And so this young man felt his anger begin to rise. Then the lady in line passed the baby to the cashier, who continued to speak with the child and spent a few moments cooing, cuddling, and holding the child. Seeing this delay, this young man could feel his anger rising. But because he had been practicing mindfulness, he became aware of the heat and tightness in his body. He was able to breathe and relax. When he looked up again, he saw the child smiling, and the cashier scanned the customer's item, moved along, and it was his opportunity to be at the front of the line. And from this stance of mindful awareness, he said, "That was a cute little boy." Upon hearing this, the cashier smiled with some sparkle in her eyes, and she said, "Oh, did you like him? That's my baby. His father was in the military, but he was killed last winter. Now I have to work full time. My mom tries to bring him in once or twice a day so that I can see him." And here we see that shift. Yes, we are shifting from an I-it mode of relating to an I-thou mode of relating. Now, translating any text is always going to be a challenge. There are some concepts in other languages that don't have a direct translation to English. So we even see this with ch and dun. And that's because a lot of languages have different pronouns for you, depending on who you are addressing. There's different languages where if you are addressing a child or a person your age or an elder, you're going to use a different you as a sign of respect. So I and thou is one way to translate it, and I and you is another way to translate it. The point is, we are coming from a stance of seeing another as a human being. So Martin Buber put it this way: I consider a tree. I can look on it as a picture, stiff column in a shock of light, or splash of green shot with the delicate blue and silver of the background. I can perceive it as movement, flowing veins on clinging, pressing pith, suck of the roots, breathing of the leaves, ceaseless commerce with earth and air, and the obscure growth itself. I can classify it in a species and study it as a type in its structure and mode of life. I can subdue its actual presence and form so sternly that I recognize it only as an expression of law, of the laws in accordance with which a constant opposition of forces is continually adjusted, or of those in accordance with which the component substances mingle and separate. I can dissipate it and perpetuate it in number, in pure numerical relation. In all of this, the tree remains my object, occupies space and time, and has its nature and constitution. This is the I-it relationship. It can, however, also come about if I have both will and grace, that in considering the tree, I become bound up in relation to it. The tree is no longer it. To effect this, it is not necessary for me to give up any of the ways in which I consider the tree. There is nothing from which I would have to turn my eyes away in order to see, and no knowledge that I would have to forget. Rather is everything, picture and movement, species and type, law and number, indivisibly united in this event. Everything belonging to the tree is in this: its form and structure, its colors and chemical composition, its intercourse with the elements and with the stars are all present in a single whole. The tree is no impression, no play of my imagination, no value depending on my mood, but it is bodied over against me and has to do with me as I with it, only in a different way. Let no attempt be made to sap the strength from the meaning of the relation. Relation is mutual. So much to explore in that little passage. First thing I want to point out is the scientific materialistic approach of the I-it. Science fundamentally is based on the assumption that this is an objectifiable, observable universe, and it sees its task as to measure and define it. And we see this with the scientific experiments that scientists do perform on animals. I love love and I love researching about love. And it always breaks my heart a little bit when I read about research on love, intimacy, relationships, that to me seems like torturing animals. It's really wild what scientists will do in the name of their research. Not just Harry Harlow torturing monkeys and putting baby monkeys in isolated cages to see how they developed, but later on in neuroscientific studies, scientists will take out parts of brains of animals just to see how they operate without that part of the brain. And to me, these studies are really quite barbaric. But it comes from that I-it relationship. That it is a mouse or a monkey or a rabbit or whatever it is that you are studying. And that separation makes one feel less guilty about the violence that is being perpetuated. So the geologian Thomas Berry wrote that we must recognize this universe not as a collection of objects, but a communion of subjects. So here's the summary. If we want true fulfillment, if we want satisfaction in our relationships, we must shift to an I thou mode that views others, God, and nature as unique subjects. This I thou relationship is sacred, it is mutual, it is reciprocal, it is literally being together. It is yoga, it is love. There's another story of a rabbi who's been with his students all night, teaching, reading, chanting the scriptures. And the sun is just about to rise. And the rabbi asks his students, when does night turn to day? So one student says, oh, I think night turns to day when the stars can no longer be seen. The rabbi says, okay, anybody else? Another one says, I think it's when you can picture a figure about 20 feet away from you. Once you can kind of make out what it is that you're seeing, once it's become about that bright, then day has begun. And the discussion goes around, and the rabbi isn't pleased with any of the answers that he's hearing. And finally, he says, night turns to day when the light shines on another person's face and you can recognize them as your own brother or sister, as your own friend. So this is when darkness turns to light, when we shift from the I-it mode of relating to the I-thou mode of relating that recognizes the humanness in another being and sees them as your friend, as your brother, as your sister. So this is also sometimes referred to as the dialogic view of the world. It is a world that exists in dialogue, exists in relationship. Buber says that all of life is meeting, meaning the meeting of entities. And we have to examine this idea of dialogue because it does have that simultaneous definition of conversation, of speaking with another human being. But you often find with conversations, there isn't true intimate dialogue, is there? A lot of conversations are just two interrupted monologues. And dialogue done in the wrong way can actually create more distance. Oftentimes, when we're listening to somebody, we're not actually listening to them. We're preparing what we are going to say, or we're just waiting for the person to stop talking so that we can say what it is that we want to say. But the I thou dialogue involves turning towards the other with your whole being. This is another piece of Buber's words. He says, I thou requires your whole being. And this is a fundamental lesson we find on the spiritual path. We know while multitasking is possible, multi-focusing is not. If we want to be present with eating, walking, or being with another person, we have to bring our whole being to the action. Body, heart, and mind all united. It's easy to turn on the television, to scroll through our phone with one hand, and to scoop food into our mouth with the other hand. Maybe you're even doing it right now for those of you listening to the recording, and I don't blame you. This is a natural thing that humans do. When we treat the world as I, it, we think we can divide up this world into distinct, separate objects. But in so doing, we never truly touch this life. We have to turn to another with our whole being. So David Whyte put it this way: your great mistake is to act the drama as if you were alone as if life were a progressive and cunning crime with no witness to the tiny hidden transgressions. To feel abandoned is to deny the intimacy of your surroundings. Surely, even you at times have felt the grand array, the swelling presence, and the chorus crowding out your solo voice. You must note the way the soap dish enables you, or the window latch grants you freedom. Alertness is the hidden discipline of familiarity. I'll say that again. Alertness is the hidden discipline of familiarity. The stairs are your mentor of things to come. The doors have always been there to frighten you and invite you. And the tiny speaker in the phone is your dream ladder to divinity. Put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. The kettle is singing, even as it pours you a drink. The cooking pots have left their arrogant aloofness and seen the good in you at last. All the birds and creatures of the world are unutterably themselves. Everything is waiting for you. So many wonderful lines in that poem. Put down the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. I love that line. I really think it speaks to the I-it mode of relating. We create separation as a form of protection. We want to create a solid, stable sense of ego self, ego self that doesn't change in a world that is constantly changing. So what do? We put up walls. We create separation. We put on armor. And the armor restricts our movement, restricts our happiness, restricts our joy. And our attempts at remaining at containing a stable, isolated sense of identity simply creates and perpetuates loneliness. So we have to put down our armor, put down the weight of our aloneness and ease into the conversation. This is the conversational nature of reality. This is the dialogic nature of reality. This is true relationship. This is true love. So this I, thou is respectful. It's honorable. It's not only seeing our humanness, but seeing the divine spark that lies within each and every human heart. There's a story about a wise rabbi. One day, his friend, an abbot, came to him and complained that his community of monks at the monastery was dwindling, and fewer people were attending Mass. Weeping, the abbot asked the wise rabbi what he should do. The rabbi, comforting him, said, "There is nothing I can do to help you, but I will tell you one thing. We have long known in the Jewish community that the Messiah is one of you." The abbot was surprised. "What? The Messiah is one of us? How can this be?" But the rabbi insisted that it was so, and the abbot went back to his monastery wondering who it could be. Once back in the monastery, he would pass by a monk and wonder if he was the one. Sitting in the chapel praying, he would hear a voice and look intently at that face and wonder, is he the one? The abbot had always been kind, but now began to treat all of his brothers with profound kindness and awe, even deeper respect and reverence. And soon everyone noticed. One of the other brothers came to him and asked him what happened. After some coaxing, the abbot told him what the rabbi had said. Soon that monk was looking at his brothers differently, with a deeper respect, wondering, is that the Messiah? Word spread quickly. The Messiah is one of us. The monastery was suddenly full of love, life, worship, and grace. The prayer life was rich, passionate, and devoted, and services became alive and vibrant. Soon the surrounding villagers came to the services, listening and watching intently, and many joined the community of monks. The monastery grew and expanded into house after house, and the monks grew in wisdom and grace before each other and in the eyes of God. And they stay still. that if you stumble across this place where there is life and hope and kindness and graciousness. So this is the shift. This is the shift from I, it to I, thou, to seeing the divine in every human being that you cross. These are different levels of awareness, different modes of relating, different stances that we can take, different attitudes that we can take upon meeting another person. There's a story of a daughter who goes to her mother and asks, "Where do human beings come from?" And the mother says, "Oh, well, God created Adam and Eve, and they were the first humans, and they procreated to create the population of humans that are alive today." The daughter, slightly skeptical, goes to her father and asks, "Dad, where do human beings come from?" And he explains, "Oh, don't you see? The theory of evolution says that we descended and evolved from monkeys." The daughter, even more confused, goes back to the mother and says, "Dad says we came from monkeys. You say that we came from God." And his mother says, "Ah, yes. Well, you see, Dad was talking about his side of the family, and I was talking about mine." So we can welcome in both sides of our experience, our humanness and our divinity. There are certain times in our life we have to be in the I, it mode of relating, or perhaps it's just simply a convenient way to be. But what would it look like to see the I, thou, to see every human being as the divine in drag, as Buddhas at the great costume ball, to see the cashier behind the counter as Jesus himself, as Mother Teresa would say, in a distressing disguise? It would change our entire world view. So some say that this is the essence to mystical awakening. And I'll probably have to have a whole talk on the mystical awakening. But for now, we can recognize that there's a fundamental human experience that has existed across time, cultures, and geographic location. Human beings sometimes slip into this condition almost like a fever dream or falling in love, or almost like the way we catch a flu. An affliction comes upon us where almost seemingly at random, or sometimes after days or weeks of intentional, conscious, and arduous effort, the veils of illusion lift off our experience. The subject object relationship dissolves away. So Thomas Merton, my favorite Christian mystic, has his infamous mystical experience, which he says was in Louisville at the corner of 4th and Walnut in the center of the shopping district. I was suddenly overwhelmed with the realization that I loved all of these people, that they were mine and I theirs, that we could not be alien to one another, even though we were total strangers. It was like waking from a dream of separateness. The whole illusion of a separate holy existence is a dream. The sense of liberation from an illusory difference was such a relief and such a joy to me that I almost laughed out loud. And if only everybody could realize this, but it cannot be explained. There's no way of telling people that they are all walking around shining like the sun. Then it was if I suddenly saw the secret beauty of their hearts, the depth of their hearts, where neither sin nor desire nor self-knowledge can reach, the core of their reality, the person that each one is in God's eyes. If only they could all see themselves as they really are. If only we could see each other that way all the time. There would be no more war, no more hatred, no more cruelty, and no more greed. So there's a few more important things to know about this I-thou relationship, is that it arises together. You can't have I without you. You can't have you without I. These concepts are interdependent. So they arise together. My knowledge of who I am arises with the knowledge of who you are. And once we recognize this and see this dialogic, this conversation between us, there's no more hatred, there's no more greed. So the memorial at the Rwandan Genocide Museum, at the very top of the entrance, there is a line. If you knew me and you knew yourself, you would not have killed me. I was even recently listening to her talk, and I totally understand the speaker's perspective. They were criticizing their spiritual community for not speaking out about a current event. They weren't, and they talked about a lot of events that were not speaking out against. And they were saying, why isn't my spiritual community speaking out against this event, this war, this murder, this violence, this thing that is currently in the news? And I totally understand that perspective. But I think it's important to recognize that our spiritual path is not limited to ending a single war or act of violence. It is completely devoted to ending all war and violence. And it begins by ending the war in the human heart. And we end that war by dissolving the illusion of separation, by seeing the divine in everybody. As Thomas Merton says, then there would be no more war, no more hatred, no more cruelty, and no more greed. If we could suddenly see the secret beauty of another's heart. So again, it requires our full being. You can't enter into an I thou relationship and be on your phone at the same time. It doesn't work. You are either in an I it relationship with multiple its or an I thou relationship with your entire being. And this to me is where God, whatever that word means to you, or the divine, truly lies. So Buber even defines God as the eternal thou. And he says, the extended lines of relation meet in the eternal thou. Some even say the extended parallel lines of relation meet at the eternal thou. And you're like, that's impossible. Parallel lines never meet. But they do at the eternal thou. This is, to me, divine work. Relationship work is divine work. For a long time, I wondered that meaning behind the famous line from Matthew, for where two or three are gathered in my name, then I am with them. Or sometimes you might hear it as when two or three people are gathered together, the church is there, or it becomes a church. And that was until I learned this perspective, the I thou perspective. And it dawned on me that God works through us and our presence to each other. And God is known through that loving presence. Anytime two people meet, see each other, hold each other, and are kind, supportive, and forgiving to each other, that implies the presence of the divine. God is manifesting through every human relationship. Loving our neighbor is loving God. So Thomas Merton also says, life is this simple. We are living in a world that is absolutely transparent and the divine is shining through it all the time. I heard that quote many times and I investigated it and I was like, wait, there's a follow-up. What is it that makes this life so translucent, so opaque that allows us to see through it all? It is care, says Merton. It is care. Our love for one another, and our interest in the other's divine humanness. So you turn to any mystic, and they'll tell you the same. All mystics speak the same language. They just have different dialects. So don't get turned off by Buber just because you're not Jewish. Don't get turned off by Thomas Merton just because you're not a Christian. And definitely don't get turned off from Hafiz because you are not a Sufi, because then you will miss out on this epic poem. I have come into this world to see this, the sword drop from men's hands, even at the height of their arc of anger, because we have finally realized there is just one flesh to wound, and it is his, the Christ's, our beloved's. I have come into the world to see this. All creatures hold hands as we pass through this miraculous existence we share on the way to an even greater being of soul, a being of just ecstatic light, forever entwined and at play with him. I've come into the world to hear this. Every song the earth has sung since it was conceived in the divine's womb and began spinning from his wish. Every song by wing and fin and hoof. Every song by hill and field and tree and woman and child. Every song of stream and rock. Every song of tool and lyre and flute. Every song of gold and emerald and fire. Every song the heart should cry with magnificent dignity to know itself as God, for all other knowledge will leave us again in want and aching. Only imbibing the glorious sun will complete us. I have come into this world to experience this. Men so true to love, they would rather die before speaking an unkind word. Men so true their lives are his covenant, the promise of hope. I have come into this world to see this, the sword drop from men's hands, even at the height of their arc of rage, because we have finally realized there is just one flesh we can wound. So that's it. That is the shift. That is our spiritual awakening, dropping out of the illusion of the I-it, of the subject-object duality, to recognize that there is just one flesh to wound, to disarm ourselves, to drop our swords, our knives, even our words of criticism, to see that we are interdependent, that we arise together. May we all see the secret beauty in each other's hearts. May we relate to each other as one divine being meeting another. And may we also relate to ourselves in the same way. To close out, straighten the spine, relax the shoulders, rest your hands on your knees, close the eyes, tune into the heart space, and let go of the weight of your aloneness and ease into the conversation. Meet reality as it is, just as it is, with an open heart. Tune into the sacred beauty in your own heart. And whether you say Om Namo Gurudev Namo, Om Namah Shivaya, Namaskaram, or Namaste, it is all the same. The divine in me honors and recognizes the divine in you. And when we both come from this place, we are one. Namaste.